We're live. Okay, I'm gonna read from today's reading is from Augmendino's Great Trilogy. He has 3 books in the trilogy. One of them is called "The Greatest Salesman in the World," and the second one is "The Greatest Secret in the World," and then the third is um, "The Greatest Miracle in the World." And that's where I'm gonna read from. I'm gonna read from the third in the trilogy, The Greatest Miracle in the World. And if you haven't read Augmendino's trilogy, I highly recommend it to go out and buy it or go to the library and read it. It's very inspiring and uplifting, all 3 of them. The Greatest Miracle in the World. I'm going to read from it for now. Oh, and there's a quote that I like from Augmendino. He says this, quote, "Nothing that is worth doing can be accomplished in your lifetime. Therefore, you will have to be saved by hope. Nothing that is beautiful will make sense in the immediate instance. Therefore, you must be saved by faith. Nothing that is worth doing can be done alone, but has to be done with others. Therefore, you must be saved by love. Peace." And then he lists the 12 greatest self-help books, Augmendino's top 12. I just want to give you them. And even reading one of them a month would be great for an entire year or whatever. Some of them are probably more likely to be in print than others, but you seek and you shall find. You'll find them. In no particular order, these are the 12 greatest self-help books that Augmendino recommends, and he was the publisher of Success Unlimited magazine. So he went through hundreds and hundreds of self-help books, and these are the top 12, the top dozen that he recommended. The Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin by Benjamin Franklin, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, Success Through a Positive Mental Attitude by W. Clement Stone and Napoleon Hill, The Power of Faith by Louis Binstock, Your Greatest Power by J. Martin Cohey, I Dare You by William Danforth, Acres of Diamonds by Russell H. Conwell, The Ability to Love by Dr. Alan Fromm, How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling, that's by Frank Betcher, The Magic Power of Emotional Appeal by Roy Garin, and As a Man Thinketh by James E. Allen. Those are the top 12. And now I'm going to read to you from The Greatest Miracle in the World. Starts off with 2 quotes from the Bible from Isaiah. This is Isaiah 6:8. Begins with, it says, quote, "Also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then said I, Here am I, send me." And then the next quote that Augmendino begins the book with is from Isaiah 38. And it goes, "Now go, write it before them in a table, and note it in a book, that it may be for the time to come, forever and ever." Timeless. I think that's what he's saying. He knew that when Augmendino knew when he was reading This Greatest Miracle in the World, when he was going to write it, he knew that this book would be read hundreds of years from now, even until the end of the time. I mean, timeless. He knew that this will be a book that will be read forever and ever. And it shows in the beginning quote. He's a visionary. Augmendino, one of the greatest writers of all time. One of my favorite authors of all time as well. Chapter 1. The first time I saw him, he was feeding pigeons. By itself, this simple act of charity is not an unusual sight. One can find old people who themselves look as though if they could use a good meal, dropping crumbs for birds on the wharves of San Francisco, the Common in Boston, the sidewalks of Times Square, and points of interest in every city. But this old man was doing it at the peak of a brutal snowstorm that, according to all the news, stations on my car radio had already dumped regular breaking 26 inches of white misery in Chicago and the suburbs. With rear wheels spinning, I had finally inched my car up the sidewalk incline to gate the walk in the South Park lot. A block behind my office, when I first noticed him, he was standing in the ebb of a monstrous snowdrift, obvious elements, rhythmically removing what appeared to be breadcrumbs from a brown paper bag and dropping them carefully into a cluster of birds that swirled and swooped around the folds of his nearly ankle-length army-style overcoat. I watched him through the metronymic sweeps of my hissing windshield wipers as I rested my chin on the steering wheel, trying to generate sufficient willpower to open my car door, stepped out into the blizzard, and walked to the gate release box. He reminded me of those St. Francis garden statues that one sees in plant and shrubbery stores. Snow almost completely covered his shoulder length hair and had sprinkled itself through his beard. Flakes had even attached themselves to his heavy eyebrows, further accenting his dark eyed cheekbone features. Around his neck hung a leather cord, and attached to it was a wooden cross which swayed from the side to side as he dispensed tiny bits of the staff of life. Tied to his left wrist was a piece of clothesline, which led down to where it was wrapped around the neck of an old multicolored basset hound whose ears dragged deeply into the accumulation of whiteness that had been falling since yesterday afternoon. As I watched the old man, his face broke into a smile and he began talking to the birds. I shook my head in silent sympathy and reached for the door handle. The 26-mile trip from home to office had consumed more than 3 hours, half a tank of gas, and nearly all my patience. My faithful 240Z, its transmission whining a constant and monotonous complaint in low gear, had run a broken field course past countless stalls of trucks, cars along Willow Road, down Eden's Expressway along Toohey Avenue, across Ridge, east on Devon, and past the Broadway intersection to the parking lot on Winthrop Street. It had been insanity on my part to even make the attempt to get to work that morning, but for the previous 3 weeks, I had been touring the United States promoting my book, The Greatest Salesman in the World. And after I had told 49 radio and television audiences, plus more than 24 newspaper reporters, that perseverance was one of the most important secrets of success, I didn't dare let myself be defeated even by that angry witch Mother Nature. Furthermore, there was a board of directors meeting scheduled for the coming Friday as Success Unlimited magazine's president. I needed this Monday and every other day this week to review our past year's performance and next year's projections with each department head. I wanted to be prepared, as I always have been, for any unexpected questions that might be tossed by one's way. I was on the feet at the head of that long boardroom table. The parking lot, situated as it was in the midst of a decaying neighborhood, changed its character twice each 24 hours. During the evening and nighttime hours, it was occupied by vehicles that would have been sold for junk by any self-respecting used car dealer. These were cars owned by local apartment dwellers, which had been unable to find a parking spot on the narrow street that bisected their street buildings. Then each morning, they all departed in a mass exodus to local and suburban factories, and the lot replenished itself with a collection of Mercedes, Cadillacs, Corvettes, and BMWs as attorneys, doctors, and the Loyola University students came into the city from the suburban world to do their thing. At any other time of the year, the lot was scabby, blemished, a black of the hand slap to every resident of the area. In all the years I had parked there, I had yet to see its downtown owners make any attempt to remove the litter, soggy newspapers, tin cans, and empty wine bottles that accumulated in their own mountains of disease against the rusty chain link fencing. The only thing the lot had going for it was there was other available parking for 10 blocks. Today, however, with all the lots buried under nearly 3 feet of snow, it reminded me of a stretch of California's Pacific Grove Beach, even to its white mounds, which only yesterday had been automobiles. Apparently, there had been no exits by the locals this morning. They had probably taken one look at their buried machines, new igloos, and either busted or gone back to bed. Entrance to the parking lot was through the two posts buried in concrete, set approximately 9 feet apart, upon which rested a large hollow iron bar gate to raise the gate to get into the lot of the park. You deposited 2 quarters in the slot of this chipped white metal box, waited for the gate to rise after it was stripped electronically by the cones, and even drove through. Then the car wheels depressed some sort of mechanism in the asphalt, automatically lowering the gate behind you. To leave the lot, you need 2 more quarters to bail yourself out, unless you had a special key which you could rent for $20 a month. Keys were inserted into a special yellow box to activate the gate, both entering and leaving. After turning my attention from the bird feeding samurai tin, I found my gate key in the glove compartment, pushed against the accumulated snow, which was considerably higher than the bottom of my door, and stepped gingerly outside. Immediately, I became aware of the incompetency of a grown man dumb enough to wear low cut rubbers on a day like this. The old man seized his feeding operation long enough to glance my own way and wave. The dogs barked once and then was silenced, and by intelligible words from his master. I nodded toward him and forced a weary smile. My good morning sounded strange and muffled in the noise deadening snowfall. His response, in the deepest voice I'd ever heard, seemed to reverberate off the surrounding buildings. Once, when Danny Thomas met radio commentator Paul Harvey, Danny had said, "You had better be God because you sure sound like him." This voice made my friend Paul sound like a timid choir boy. I bid you greetings on the beautiful day. I had neither the strength nor the desire to dispute his words. I turned my key into the yellow box until I heard the mechanism activate. Then, half sliding, half walking, I returned to my car. Behind me, as I heard it respond for several thousand mornings, the gate creaked as it raised itself from my entrance. But no sooner I was back in my car, ready to shift into drive and ease my way through the deep snow into the lot, then the gate crashed back down to its original horizontal position with a loud metallic clang. I sighed in frustration, shift back into park, reopened the car door, stepped back into the cold snow, and slid up the yellow box, turned my key again. The gate rose once more, pointing its rusted tip toward the snow-filled heavens, and then fell back. Bong! Impatiently, I turned the key again, almost hard enough to snap in this time. Same thing, a short in the wiring perhaps, from the moisture. No matter, there was no way I was going to get into my car that parking lot, and if I left on the street, it was certain to be towed away. I just stood there, knee deep in snow, cursing the idiocy of the aborted journey while I rubbed snowflakes out of my eyes. Just as beginning to doubt everything I had ever written or said about the value of perseverance, the bird feeding stranger interrupted my self pity. "Let me help you." That voice was truly something, and there was a hint of command as well as an offering of aid in the resonant tone. He had moved close to me, and I found myself looking up into his gay, amazing face, gaunt, heavily lined, set with large brown eyes. He had to be nearly 7 feet tall because I'm no pygmy. I smiled and shrugged my shoulders at this Abraham Lincoln look-alike and said, "Thanks, but I don't think there's much we can do." The deep furrows around his eyes and mouth arched into the warmest and most gentle smile I'd ever seen on a human as he gestured toward the recalling gate. "It will not be difficult. Turn your key into the box again. When the gate rises, I shall step under it, grasp it with my outstretched hands, and hold it until your car passes through. Then I'll let it fall." That's a heavy gate. His laugh boomed through the lot. I am old, but I am quite strong, and most certainly it is worth our efforts to relieve you of the problem. Carlyle wrote that every noble work seems at first impossible. Carlyle, yes, Carlyle, Thomas, 19th century English essayist. I didn't believe this. I was standing in the snowdrift with an icy wind lacerating my face. My feet were soaked and freezing, and I was turning into a snowman A long-haired 70-year-old hippie was giving me a mini course in English lit. What else could I do? I'm a great believer in considering one's options, but I've also learned there are times and situations when you don't have any. I mumbled my thanks and waited while the old man gently tugged his bastard toward the fence, where he removed the rope from his wrist and tied it through the two links. Then he returned to my side and nodded. Almost hypnotically, I obeyed his silent command and turned my key in the box. Up groaned the gate bar, then the old man stepped under its grasped cold metal bar firmly just as it began its descent. I'm not too clear about the next several minutes, although I've thought about it often. Perhaps the light and hurried breakfast and long drive had finally taken their toll. I felt dizzy and my vision seemed to shift out of focus, as if someone had smeared Vaseline on my reading glasses. Everything seemed diffused. A strange tremor shook my body as I tried to fix on the apparition before me. Through the falling snow, I could see the wooden cross on his chest, and perhaps that's what triggered the illusion. Long hair, beard, hands extended at a 45-degree angle over his head, the gate bar, the crossbar, the patibulum carried by the condemned man on the way to Golgotha for his crucifixion. His voice, now touched with urgency, broke through my fantasy. Hurry, drive in, drive in. I scrambled back into the car, shifted into low gear, gradually applied pressure to the accelerator. The tires grabbed, and I moved slowly past the stranger, under the bar and through the gate. I eased the car gently into a low spot among the drifts and cut the ignition. My hands were trembling, my head was throbbing, my legs felt weak. Then I reached behind my seat, pulled out my attache case, opened the door, and fell headfirst into the snow. I arose, brushed myself off, and locked the door. I turned toward the gate to thank the old man. My parking lot saver was nowhere in sight. Chapter 2. I didn't see him again until late spring. It had been one of those Fridays that never seemed to end. Problems concerning routine, matters involved with publishing a monthly magazine had increased in velocity and numbers during the day, and by the time all the brush fires were extinguished, I was alone and beat, both physically and mentally. I sat at my desk listening to the gentle tick of my desk clock and dreading that long drive home in traffic. Even at this hour, Eden's expressway would be jammed. Once more, those nagging and recurring questions popped into my head. Why are you working so damn hard? Did you think it would be easy once you got to be number one? Why don't you resign? Your book royalties are already 4 times larger than your salary. Why are you trying to prove now that the magazine is a success? Why don't you go somewhere where it is peaceful and quiet and write all those books you'll still got burning inside of you? Habit and my pride seem to be the only logical answer to these questions. I've taken Success Unlimited magazine from a monthly circulation of only 4,000 with 3 employees to its present 200,000 a staff at 34. Yet I knew there were still 120 million potential subscribers in our country, and it was a challenge going after them. Then I tried to remember who had written, "The beginning of pride is in heaven. The continuance of pride is on earth. The end of pride is in hell. No luck, bad memory." I tossed my reading glasses into my attache case, grabbed my jacket and top coat, turned off the lights, and locked the office. Except for the street lamp on the corner of Broadway and Devon, it was dark as I walked slowly past the window of route photographers. Across the alley, out behind our building, under the overhead train bridge, and through the small opening into the parking lot, which is garish, cracked orange and yellow sign flashing, "Park yourself, only 50 cents." I was halfway across the shadowy lot, now nearly filled with neighborhood cars, before I saw him. His tall silhouette moved silently from behind a parked panel truck, and even in the blackness I recognized him before. I saw his dog trailing behind. I turned and walked toward him. "Good evening," that basso profound voice replied. "I bid you greetings on this most beautiful evening, sir." I never had the opportunity to thank you for helping me in the snow that day. "It was nothing. We are all here to help one another." I reached down to pat the Bassett, who had been noozling at my pant leg, and then I extended my hand toward the old man. My name is Mandino, Augmentino. His giant fingers wrapped themselves around mine, and I am honored to meet you, Mr. Mandino. My name is Simon Potter, and this four-legged ally of mine is called Lazarus. Lazarus, yes. He sleeps so much of the time that I never know whether he's dead or alive. I laughed. You will forgive me, Mr. Mendino, but your first name, it's very distinctive. Og. Og. How do you spell it? O-G. That was your given name. I chuckled. No, my real name is Augustine. Back in high school, I wrote a column for a school paper, and 1 month I signed my piece as A-U-G, Og. After I had written it, I decided to be different and spell it phonetically O-G, and it stuck. That is a rare name. There cannot be many Augs in this world. I've been told that one too many. Do you still write? Yes. What sort of writing? Books, articles? Your books have been published? Yes, 5 of them. That is marvelous. Who would expect to meet an author here among the empty wine bottles? I'm afraid that's where you're liable to meet a lot of authors, Simon. Yes, sad but true. I too write a little, but only to pass time and to satisfy myself. The man moved closer to study my face. You look tired, Mr. Mandino, or rather, I think I should call you Mr. Og. I am tired. Long day, long week. You have far to journey before you reach home, about 26 miles. Simon Potter turned and pointed his long arm toward the drab 4-story brown brick apartment house facing the parking lot. I live here on the second floor. Before you began your long drive home on a glass of sherry with me, it will relax you. I began to shake my head, but as the snow that day, I found myself wanting to obey him. I unlocked my car door, tossed in my top coat and case, closed and locked the door, and fell into step behind Lazarus. We passed through the unswept lobby, past the pockmarked brass mailboxes with their yellowed plastic name holders, and climbed the worn and pitted concrete stairway. Simon removed the key from his pocket, turned it into the lock of a pine-stained door on which number 21 had been concealed in the red, pushed it open and made a sweeping gesture for me to enter. He flipped the light switch and said, "Forgive my humble retreat. I live alone, except for Lazarus, and housework was never one of my better skills." His apologies were unnecessary. The tiny living room was immaculate, from the lint-free braided oval rug to the cobbled ceiling. Almost immediately, I spotted the books, hundreds of them spilling from 2 large bookcases and stacked up in neat piles as tall as their owner. I looked at Simon quizzically. He shrugged his shoulders and warmed the room with a smile. What else can an old man do but read and think? If you make yourself comfortable, I shall pour out sherry. When Simon went off to the kitchen, I walked over to those books and began reading titles, hoping they would tell me something about his fascinating giant. I cocked my head back and wrapped my eyes along some of the book spines. Will Durant's Caesar and Christ, Gibran's The Prophet, Plutarch's Lives of Great Men, Fulton's Physiology of the Nervous System, Goldstein's The Organism, Isley's The Unexpected Universe Romance, Don Quixote, Aristotle's works, Franklin's autobiography, Menninger's The Human Mind, Kempis, The Imitation of Christ, the Talmud, several Bibles. My host walked toward me holding out my glass of wine. I took it, placed it gently against his glass. The rims touched with a soft, lovely note in that silent room. Simon spoke. To our friendship, may it be long and filled with good. Amen, I replied. He pointed his glass toward the books. What do you think of my library? It's a great collection. I wish I had them. You have wide interests. Not really. They're an accumulation from many years of pleasant hours in second-hand bookstores. Still, they have a common theme which make each volume very special. Special? Yes, each in its own way deals with it and explains some aspects of the greatest miracle in the world. And so I call them the Hands of God books. Hand of God. It is difficult for me to put into words, yet I am positive that certain pieces of music, certain works of art, and certain books and plays were created not by the composer, artist, author, or playwright, but by God. and those whom we have acknowledged as the creators of these works were only the instruments employed by God to communicate with us. What's the matter, Mr. Og? Apparently, I had jumped in at his words. Only 2 weeks earlier in New York City, Barry Farber, a popular radio host, had used those exact words, the hand of God, when praising my book to his audience during my appearance on his program. You mean you believe that God still communicates with us as he did during the days of the ancient Jewish prophets? I'm positive. For thousands of years, this world witnessed countless of parade of prophets pronouncing and explaining the will of God. Elijah, Amos, Moses, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Samuel, and other marvelous messengers until Jesus and Paul, and then no more? I cannot believe that. No matter how many of his prophets were ridiculed, chastised, tortured, and even murdered, I cannot conceive that God finally gave up on us and turned his back on our needs, causing some of us to finally assume that he must be dead since we hadn't heard from him so long a time. Instead, I truly believe that he has sent to every generation special people, talented people, brilliant people, all bearing the same message in one form or another, that every human is capable of performing the greatest miracle in the world. And it is man's most grievous fault that he has not comprehended the message, blinded as he is by the trivia of each succeeding civilization. What's the greatest miracle in the world that we can all perform? First, Mr. Og, can you define a miracle for me? I think so. It's something that happens contrary to the laws of nature or science, a temporary suspension of one of these laws. That is very concise and accurate, Mr. Og. Now tell me, do you believe you are capable of performing miracles? Of suspending any laws of nature or science? I laughed nervously and shook my head. The old man rose, picked up a small glass paperweight from the coffee table, and held it across to me. If I release this weight, it will fall to the floor. Is that not true? I nodded. What law decrees that it will fall on the floor? The law of gravity. Exactly. Then, without warning, he let the paperweight fall from his hands. Instinctively, I reached for it and caught it before it hit the floor. Simon folded his hands and looked down at me with a self-satisfied grin. Do you realize what you just have done, Mr. Og? I caught your paperweight. More than that, your action temporarily suspended the law of gravity. By any definition of a miracle, you have just performed one. Now, what would you judge has been the greatest miracle ever performed on this earth? I thought for several minutes. Probably those cases where the dead have supposedly come back to life. I agree. As what is a consensus world opinion, I am sure. But how does all this connect to those books you've got piled up? Certainly, they don't contain any secret methods on how to come back from the dead. Ah, but they do, Mr. Og. Most humans in varying degrees are already dead. In one way or another, they have lost their dreams, their ambitions, their desire for a better life. They have surrendered their fight for self esteem and they have compromised their great potential. They have settled for a life of mediocrity, days of despair and nights of tears. They are no more than living deaths confined to cemeteries of their choice. Yet they do not need remain in that state. They can be resurrected from their sorry condition. They can each perform the greatest miracle in the world. They can each come back from the dead, and in those books are the simple secrets, techniques, and methods which they can still apply to their own lives to become anything they wish to be and to attain all the true riches of life. I didn't know what to say or how to respond. I sat staring at him until he broke the silence. Do you accept the possibility of individuals performing such a miracle with their own life, Mr. Og? Yes, I do. Did you ever write about such miracles in your books? Sometimes. I would like to read what you have written. I'll bring you a copy of my first book. There are miracles in it. Yes, many. When you wrote it, did you feel the hand of God upon you? I don't know, Simon. I don't think so. Perhaps I should be able to tell you after I've read it, Mr. Og. We sat after that exchange in a stillness interrupted only by an occasional rumble from a truck or bus bouncing along the ruts of Devon Avenue. I sipped the sherry and felt more relaxed and at peace with the world than I had in many months. Finally, I placed my glass on the small polished end table next to my chair and found myself staring at two small photographs. each enclosed in a small bronze frame. One was of a lovely brunette woman, and the other of a blonde male child in military uniform. I glanced at Simon, and he sensed my silent question. My wife and my son. I nodded. His voice, now so soft I could scarcely hear him, seemed to float across the small room to me. Both are dead. I closed my eyes and nodded again. His next words were barely a whisper. The child in 1939. When I opened my eyes, the old man had his head bowed and his two giant hands were clenched together, tightly against his forehead. Then, as if embarrassed that he had momentarily exposed his grief to a stranger, he sat up and forced a smile. I changed the subject. What do you do, Simon? Do you have a job? The old man hesitated for several moments. Then he smiled again, spread his hands in a self effacing gesture, and said, I am a rag picker, Mr. Ogg. I thought rag pickers disappeared with the soup kitchens and hunger marches of the early 1930s. Simon reached across, placed his hand on my shoulder, and squeezed it gently. By definition, Mr. Ogg, a rag picker is one who picks up rags and other waste materials from the streets and junk heaps to earn a livelihood. I would imagine the sort of rag pickers almost disappeared from the American scene during these years of nearly full employment, but we could see them again if conditions change. I doubt it. Our crime rate seems to be telling us that we've discovered faster and easier ways of laying our hands on a buck, like mugging, armed robbery, and burglary. I'm afraid that what you say is true, Mr. Ogg. Still, in this day of soaring prices for paper and metals, I would imagine that a rag picker or junk man could do quite well for himself. However, I'm not that sort of rag picker. I seek more valuable materials than old newspapers and aluminum beer cans. I search out waste materials of the humankind, people who have been discarded by others or even themselves, people who still have great potential but have lost their self esteem and their desire for a better life. When I find them, I try to change their lives for the better, give them a new sense of hope and direction, and help them return from their living death, which to me is the greatest miracle in the world. And of course, the wisdom I have received from my Hand of God books has helped me immensely in my I call it profession. See this wooden cross that I often wear? It was carved by a young man who was once a shipping clerk. I ran into him one night on Wilson Avenue, or rather, I should say he ran into me. He was intoxicated. I brought him here after several pots of black coffee, a cold shower, and some food. We talked. He was truly a lost soul, nearly crushed by his inability to properly support his wife and two young children. He had been working at two jobs more than 17 hours a day for almost 3 years, and he had reached the breaking point. He had begun to hide in the bottle when I found him, trying not to face his living death in conscience that was telling him he didn't deserve his wonderful young family. I managed to convince him that his situation was common and far from hopeless, and he began to visit me nearly every day before he went to his night job. Together, we explored and discussed many of the ancient and modern secrets of happiness and success. I imagine I touched on every wise man from Solomon to Emerson to Gibran, and he listened carefully. What happened to him? When he had $1,000 saved, he quit both jobs, packed his family in their old Plymouth, and headed for Arizona. Now they have a tiny roadside stand just outside of Scottsdale, and he's beginning to command fairly large prices for his wood carvings. Now and then he writes, always thanking me for giving him the courage he needed to change his life. This cross was one of his first carvings. He's now a happy and fulfilled man, not any richer, mind you, just happier. You see, Mr. Ogg, most of us build prisons for ourselves. After we occupy them for a period of time, we will become accustomed to the walls and accept the false premise that we are incarcerated for life. As soon as that belief takes hold of us, we abandon hope of ever doing more with our lives and of ever giving our dreams a chance to be fulfilled. We become puppets and begin to suffer living deaths. It may be praiseworthy and noble to sacrifice your life to a cause or a business or the happiness of others. But if you're miserable and unfulfilled is that lifestyle, I know it, then to remain it's hypocrisy, a lie and a rejection of the faith placed in you by your Creator. Simon, forgive me, but does it ever occur to you that perhaps you should not interfere in the lives of people or that you have no right to do so? After all, they're not out there looking for you. You must find them and then convince them that they can have a new life if they are willing to try. Aren't you trying to play God? The old man's face softened in a look of sympathy and compassion for my apparent lack of perception and understanding. Yet his reply was brief and forgiving. Mr. Og, I am not playing God. What you will learn sooner or later is that God very often plays man. God will do nothing without man, and whenever he works a miracle, it is always done through man. He rose as if to bring our visit to an abrupt end, a technique I have used frequently at the office if it was in my best interest to terminate an interview. I shook his hand and I stepped into the hallway. Thanks for the hospitality and the sherry. It was my pleasure, Mr. Og, and please bring me a copy of your book when you have a chance. During that long drive home, one question continued to intrude itself into my thoughts. If that wise old ragpicker specializing in rescuing human refused, why was he wasting his time on me, an affluent, successful company president in the 50% tax bracket who had just written a national bestseller? Chapter 3. Several days later, and I was getting out of my car in the parking lot, I heard my name being called with the volume of sound only slightly lower in the decibel count than the public address system at Wrigley Field. I looked around but couldn't see him. Mr. Og, up here. Simon was leaning out of the second floor apartment window over a plant filled window box, waving a small blue watering can to attract my attention. I waved. Mr. Og, your book. Don't forget your promise. I nodded. He pointed inside his apartment this evening. Before you go home, I nodded again. He smiled and shouted, I'll have your sherry ready. I threw him a circled thumb and forefinger, looked, locked the car, and headed for the problems of the day. Simon Potter, who are you? Simon Potter, what are you? Simon Potter, why are you? Like some simple, almost forgotten roundly from my youth, I found myself silently repeating these three questions in time with my steps as I hurried toward the office. I've been unable to get a handle on my feelings about the old man, and it's bothered me. He fascinated me, and for some incredible reason, he frightened me. Both his appearance and his demeanor fit all my preconceived notions of how the biblical prophets and mystics must have looked and acted. And I would think about him at strange times in the middle of a budget meeting, while reading submitted articles, when writing a book review. His face, his voice, his charismatic manner would intrude themselves into whatever I was thinking and momentarily wipe out of my concentration. Who was he? Where did he come from? What was this latter day Isaiah doing in my life? Maybe I'll get some answers this evening for my own peace of mind. I hope so. Toward closing time, I asked Pat Smith, my secretary, to requisition a copy of my book, The Greatest Salesman in the World, from our inventory. She paused in the doorway after placing the book in my hands. Anything else, Og? No thanks, Pat. See you in the morning. Good night. Good night. Don't forget to turn off the coffee machine. I won't. You said that the last time you worked late and ruined two pots. I heard her lock the outside door for a while. I sat holding the book, my creation. That was my now being acclaimed by Publishers Weekly as the bestseller that nobody knows. In 4 years, it had never made the big city bestsellers lists, and yet with a phenomenal sale of 400,000 hardcover copies, it had already outsold every hardcover edition and every book written by Harold Robbins, Irving Wallace, or Jacqueline Suzanne. Now, there were rumors that several paperbacks houses were interested in acquiring the reprint rights, and they were talking big monies, like six-digit money. Home run. What if it all happened? Could I handle it? Could I cope with all the sudden wealth and the national publicity that would surely follow a promotional campaign and conducted by any of the large paperback houses? What kind of personal price would I end up paying for all this when I regret it later? I remember what Simon had said about the lifetime prisons we build around ourselves. Would this kind of success be a key to release myself or a key to lock myself in? What more did I want from my life anyway? Would I change my lifestyle if I had that kind of financial freedom? Who can really ever have an answer to these questions before the fact? I tried to put all the what if thoughts out of my mind and open the book to autograph it for Simon. What could I inscribe on the fly leaf that would be appropriate for the saint like man? Somehow the proper words were important to me. And what would an expert on Gibran, Plutarch, Plato, Seneca, Isley think of the many little books after he had read it? That was important to me. I began to write for Simon Potter, God's finest rag picker with love, Augmentino. I remember to turn off the coffee machine, turn on the burglar alarm, flicked off the lights, locked up, and walked across the shadowy parking lot to his apartment building. I found number 21 scrawled in yellow crayon above one lobby mailboxes. Hit the bell button twice and climbed the stairs. Simon was waiting for me in the hall. You remembered. You reminded me. Ah, yes, like the most old men, I am both rude and presumptuous. Forgive me my trespasses. Mr. Ogg, come in, come in. While we were still standing, we were conducting our exchange. I handed him a book, and he gave me a glass of sherry. He frowned when he read the title, The Greatest Salesman in the World. Very interesting. May I guess who that might be? You'll never guess, Simon. It's not who you think it is. Then he opened the cover and read my inscription. His face seemed to soften, and when he looked at me, his big brown eyes were moist. Thank you. I know I shall enjoy it. But why did you inscribe it in such a manner? Ragpicker, yes, but God's finest? I pointed toward his stacks of books. When I was here before, you were telling me about your theory that some books were written and guided by the hand of God. I just figured out that if you could recognize when a writer had been touched by God's hand, you must be a special friend of his. He studied my face intently, staring at me for interminably uncomfortable minutes until I broke our eye contact. And when you like to read your book and decide whether or not I think it belongs in the same category as others, assisted by my hand of God as or not. I don't know whether I want you to do or not, Simon. Maybe subconsciously you do, but I hadn't thought about it. All I know for sure is that I get the strangest pronouncements when I am with you. You're in my mind a good deal, and I don't know why. The old man leaned his head back on his overstuffed chair and closed his eyes. Pronounctions is foreboding something about to happen. Is that how you feel when you're with me or when you think about me? I'm not quite sure that explains the sensation. Perhaps it is a feeling that we have met before or shared some experiences in the past. What do the French call it? Oh, yes, deja vu. That's closer to you. Have you ever had a dream and then when you woke, you tried to remember it, and all that remained in your memory were shadows and unrecognizable voices with no meaning and no relationship to your life? The old man nodded many times. Well, that's how I feel when I'm with you or think about you. I guess the kids would call it vibes. Only I can characterize it because I've never experienced it before. The mind is a very strange mechanism, Mr. Ogg. Simon, I couldn't even begin to guess how many books and magazine articles I've read about the mind in the past 10 years for possible use in my magazine. Yet the more I read, the more I've come to realize how very little we know about the mystery within us, or even where it's located. The old man rubbed his hand across his cheek and said, Dr. Carl Menninger wrote that the human mind is far more than the brain's little bag of tricks. It is instead the entire personality made up of humans' instincts, habits, memories, organs, muscles, and sensations, all going through a constantly changing process. I know Dr. Menninger personally. Really? Yes. What kind of man is he? He's a giant of a man, almost just as a beautiful man like you, and he always has a twinkle in his eyes when he speaks. Is there what you call a twinkle in my eyes, Mr. Ogg? Sometimes, Simon, sometimes. He smiled sadly. I like best what Milton wrote about the mind. The mind is in its own place and in itself can make a heaven or hell, and hell of a heaven. Mr. Ogg, our mind is the greatest creation on earth, and it can generate the most sublime happiness for its owner, or it can destroy him. Yet, although we have been given the secret of how to control it for our happiness and benefit, we still function completely ignorant of its potential, like the most stupid of animals. The secret of how to control our mind for our benefit. Simon pointed toward the book stacks. It's all there. Only one has only to study the treasures that lie exposed all around us. For countless centuries, man compared his mind to a garden. Seneca said the soil, no matter how rich, could not be productive without cultivation, and neither could our minds. Sir Joshua Reynolds wrote that our mind was only a barren soil, soon exhausted and unproductive, unless it was continually fertilized with new ideas. And James Allen, in his monumental classic As a Man Thinketh, wrote that a man's mind was like a garden which may be intelligently cultivated or allowed to run wild, but whether cultivated or neglected, it would produce. If no useful seeds were planted, then an abundance of useless weed seeds would fall into the land, and the results would be wrong, useless, harmless, and impure plants. In other words, whatever we allow it to enter into our minds will always bear fruit. I lit a cigarette and hung on to every word. Now, man is comparing his mind to a computer, but his conclusions are the same as Seneca's and others. The computer people have a phrase, actually an acronym, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. If one puts faulty information to the computer out, faulty answers. So with our minds, whether one is thinking in terms of a garden or an IBM 360, put negative material in it, and that's what you'll reap. On the other hand, if you program in or plant beautiful, positive, correct thoughts and ideas, that's what you'll harvest. So it's simple, you see, you can actually become whatever you're thinking. As a man thinking in his heart, so is he, Alan wrote. Man is made or unmade by himself. In the army of thought, he forges the weapons by which he destroys himself. He also fashions the tools with which he builds for himself heavenly mansions of joy and strength and peace. By the right choice and true application of thought, man ascends to the divine perfection. Mr. Og, note these words by the right choice. They're the cornerstone of a happy life, and perhaps at the other time you will let me elaborate. In other words, Simon, you're saying that we can program our mind, but how? Very simple. We can do it for ourselves, or others will do it for us. Merely by hearing or reading a thought or an affirmation, whether it be truthful or the wildest lies, over and over, our mind will eventually imprint that thought and will become a permanent part of our personality, so strong that we will even act on it without consideration or reflection in the future. Hitler, you may recall, did this to an entire country, and brainwashing is a phrase which will ultimately, after many sad experiences by our captured troops in the Orient, we become what we think always. This seemed like a good opportunity to do some probing, and so I took it. Simon, tell me about yourself. Do you mind? He shook his head, placed the wine glass on the lamp table, folded his hands in his lap, looked down at them as he spoke. I do not mind. This opportunity has not come to me in many years, and I also realize that you are hoping I may touch upon some fact, some clue that will clarify whatever seems to concern you about our relationship. First, I am 78 years old and in good health. I've been in this country since 1946. Came here right after the war. Yes. What did you do before the war? He smiled. I realized it will require a good deal of blind faith on your part to believe me, but I headed the largest export import firm in Germany that dealt exclusively with goods from the Middle East. My home was in Frankfurt, but the firm's main office was I interrupted, in Damascus? He glanced at me strangely. Yes, Mr. Og, Damascus. I rubbed my hands across my face and down the rest of the sherry. How in the name of God did I know that? For some inexplicable reason, I had the sudden urge to get up and run out of his apartment. Instead, I just sat there with two absolutely immobile legs, paralyzed by an unknown dilemma. I didn't want to hear any more, and yet I wanted to hear it all. The reporter in me finally won, and I began firing questions at him like some ambitious county prosecutor. He responded to each of my questions at his own pace. Simon, did you have any branch offices? 10. In cities such as Jerusalem, Baghdad, Alexandria, Cairo, Beirut, and Aleppo. 10. What kind of merchandise do you export and import? Mostly goods with some degree of rarity and value. Finished wools and linens, fine glassware, precious stones, the finest rugs, some leather goods, coated papers. Your firm, you said, was large? We're the largest of its kind in the world. Our annual sales volume, even in the midst of the Depression in 1936, exceeded more than $200 million in American currency. And you were a company president? Simon cocked his head sadly. It is not difficult to be company president when one is sole owner and founder. And he held up my book, pointing to the title, also the company's top salesman. My host rose and refilled my glass. I downed half of it and I studied him carefully. Was he putting me on? Finally, I grasped his arm and turned him gently toward me as I was staring directly into his eyes. Simon, in truth, you have already read my book. Forgive me, Mr. Ogg, but I've never seen a copy of your book until this evening. Why? The greatest salesman in the world is set in the time of Christ. It tells the story of a young camel boy, Hafid, who had his ambitions to become a salesman in order to earn his share of gold that he saw were the fruits of efforts of the other salesmen in the caravan. Finally, after many rebuffs, Hafid is given one robe by the caravan master and dispatched to a nearby village called Bethlehem to prove that he can sell. Instead, the youth, after failing to sell the robe for 3 humiliating days, presents it to a warm newborn baby sleeping in a manger in a cave. Then he returns to the caravan, believing he had failed as a salesman, never noticing the bright star that followed him. But the caravan master interrupts the star as a sign that had been prophesied many years before and gives our young man 10 scrolls of success, which the youth eventually applies to his life to become the greatest salesman in the world. That is a very touching plot, Mr. Ogg. There's more, Simon. When the youth feed becomes wealthy and powerful, he establishes his main warehouse in a certain city. Would you care to guess the city? Damascus. Yes, in time he opens other warehouses and branches throughout the Middle East. How many, Simon? 10. Yes, again, and the goods he sold, as described in the book, were the same goods you sold. The old man turned his head away from me and spoke very slowly. Those are exceedingly strange and coincidences, Mr. Hogg. I pressed on. Tell me about your family, Simon. He hesitated for several minutes before speaking again. Well, as I have mentioned, my home was in Frankfurt. Actually, we lived in the suburb in Schosterhausen, on a lovely estate in the sight of the river Main. Yet my time was limited. If it was time, it was always saying goodbye to my family at the airport. More and more, I came to hate the days and weeks when I was apart from my wife and young son. Finally, in 1935, I decided to do something about my life. I made very careful plans for the future. I decided to work very hard until 1940, and then I would take from the business sufficient assets for my family and me to live comfortably for the rest of our lives. Then I would transfer controlling interest in the company to those who employ it and be so loyal to me through the years. I interrupted him again, and this time my voice broke. Simon, when you read my book, you will learn that my greatest salesman, Hafid, finally gave his business and most of his wealth to those who had helped him build it. The old man was frowning and shaking his head at me. That cannot be, that cannot be. You'll read it for yourself and whatever your family. By this time Hitler had come to power, yet I, like most business people, had no idea the monster we had blindly allowed to take control of our country. My wife was a Jew, and while I was on my many trips to Damascus, I was visited one day by one of Hitler's agents. He calmly notified me that both my wife and son were what he called protective custody and they would be released to me only upon my signing over to the National Social Party, my entire company, and all its assets. I signed without hesitation. Then I immediately flew back to Frankfurt and was arrested by the secret police at the airport gate. I spent the entire war years being trucked from one concentration camp to another. Not being Jew, I guess, saved my life. And your wife and son, I never saw them again. I sort of say, sorry, but it didn't. And your business gone, everything confiscated by the Nazis. After the war, I spent nearly 4 years trying to find any clue concerning my family. Both the Americans and British were most cooperative and sympathetic. Finally, I learned through the American intelligence that both my wife and son had been murdered and cremated at the Dachau almost immediately after the being captive. It was tough to continue. I felt like some cruel, inconsiderate, forcing the man to relive memories that he long ago probably pushed into the background of his mind in order to maintain his sanity. Still, it continued. How did you get to this country? In my affluent days, I had made many fine friends in Washington. One of them interceded with the proper immigration authorities who waived my lack of passport and let alone me money for passage. I visited Chicago in 1931 and liked its vitality, so I came here. What have you been doing all these years? He shrugged his shoulders and started up the ceiling. What can an ex-millionaire company president whose ambitions all died in the gas chamber do? I worked at 100 odd jobs only to survive. Nightclub janitor, cook, city sanitation, work, construction work, anything. I knew I had all the necessary knowledge, experience, and ability to start a new business of my own, but I had no room for it anymore. There was no reason to succeed or acquire wealth, And so I made no effort. I finally passed the city examinations and became a school janitor for Foster Avenue. That was very good for me. I was around laughing children all day, very good. Now and then I would see a lot that reminded me of my Derek. It was fine, decent job. I retired when I was 65, and the city began paying me a small pension now to live and read. Whatever made you decide to become what you call a rag picker? Simon smiled and leaned back to his chair, staring up at the ceiling again as if trying to remember details of an event that had been long under, undisturbed among his memories. I moved into the small apartment soon after I retired. Lazarus, myself, and my books. Each morning it became a ritual for Lazarus and me to walk completely around the block. One morning, as I was leaving the building, I happened to look across the gate to the parking lot where I first met you, and there was a young lady who appeared to be some sort of difficulty. Her automobile was parked at the approach of the gate, which was down, and she was angrily pounding on the metal box which accepts the coins and activates the gate. I went over to her and asked if I could be of assistance. She was crying in her between her sobs, and she told me that she had put her last quarter, 2 quarters, in the coin box and the gate had not risen. Furthermore, she was due in class at Loher. In less than 2 minutes for final exam, I did what anyone else would have done. I removed 2 quarters from my pant pocket, dropped them into the coin slot, and this time the gate went open. When I continued my walk with Lazarus, by now the old man was pacing the room. We had not gone very far when I heard footsteps hurrying up behind me and turned to see the lovely young lady coming toward me, still with tears in her eyes, but smiling. Before I realized what she was doing, she had reached up, thrown her arms around me, pulled me down to her, and kissed me on the cheek. The first time a woman had embraced me since my wife. The young lady said nothing. There was just a hug and kiss, and then she scampered off. That trivial instant was what gave my life a new meaning and direction. Mr. Og, I resolved to stop hiding in my small apartment, to stop feeling sorry for what life had given me, and to begin giving some of myself to others after all the years of self pity. Actually, you see, it was a selfish decision because the feeling that went through me when that grateful girl kissed me was one I had not known for many years. It was the feeling that only comes when one has helped another who has no thought of personal gain. I've been a rag picker ever since. I felt drained. The questions and answers had exhausted me. Still, there was one thing more I had to know. Simon, you mentioned that your son's name was Eric. What was your wife's name, Mr. Og? And my wife had a name as lovely as her soul, Leisha. All I could do was sigh and whisper, Simon, please hand me my book. The old gentleman placed the book in my lap. It turned hurriedly through the first few pages and stopped on page 14. Simon, look, here I am pointing halfway down the page is the name I gave to the wife of Hafid, the greatest salesman in the world. Read it. A half sob, half cry of anguish escaped from the old man's lips as he focused on the printed page. Then he looked at me, unbelievably large tears forming in those unforgettable eyes. It cannot be, it cannot be. He took the book in his giant hands, staring intently at the page. Finally, he raised it to his cheek, caressed it gently against his beard, and murmured softly over and over, Lisha, Lisha, Lisha. A month passed before I saw him again. It was well past closing time, and I was alone in my office trying to make some then in the correspondence that accumulated during my absence. I heard the outer office door click, stiffen whenever it had been neglected. Then Lazarus appeared in my office doorway in a flurry of coordinated movements, tail wagging, ears rising and falling, sad eyes weeping, tongue lashing, pulling. The old man hugged me. Mr. Og, it's good to see you. Lazarus and I were both worried about you. I've been away on a book business time, and I think someone is trying to change my life for the better. I'm not sure. Maybe you'll be able to tell me. I know you weren't here, Mr. Og. Each day this is chapter 4. Without looking at my window for your old little brown car. No car, no Mr. Og. And then this morning, there it was. I was so happy. I wanted to see you. And yet I didn't want to bother you. It took all day to get up the courage to come here. I'm glad you did. I've going to see you anyway to tell you the news about the book. Good news. I'm still not sure it's happened to me. The old man nodded and patted my shoulder proudly. Then he led Lazarus to my coat rack and tied a loose knot around his base with the rope. The dog buried his nose in the heavy carpet and closed his eyes. You look great, Simon. I've never seen you in a suit and tie before. My visitor slyly rubbed his long fingers on his wrinkled jacket label and shrugged. I could not come to visit a company president looking like Well, why not? I imagine your rag picker works all sorts of disguises and probably infiltrated more walks of life than the CIA. Angels without portfolio. The beginning was a smile evaporated. Suddenly, when I said angels, then he collected himself, forced a wry grin. Only a writer could coin such a poignant description. Still, we ragpickers are very short-handed. There's also a population explosion on humanity's junk piles, and none of us to do the job properly. I wonder if your magazine's publisher, W. Clement Stone, is a ragpicker. We both turned our heads toward a portrait of my boss, staring warmly at me from the paneled wall at this right-hand side of the desk. I think he must have been Simon. He kicked me off the junk pile 16 years ago when I was broke, alone, and taking frequent dives into the bottle. Funny, but you rag creators all seem to have a policy of secrecy about your good deeds. Since I'm so close to him, I happen to know about some of the people that Mr. Stone had helped, and yet very few of his good Samaritan activities ever get into the papers. Simon nodded. That is because we ragpickers all try to follow the biblical command which Lloyd Douglas popularized in his book Magnificent Obsession. You mean to do good and then just be quiet. His booming laugh filled my office. That's what I meant, although I've never heard it put exactly that way. I think I still prefer the original injunction from Jesus, as Matthew wrote it. Simon, did you know that when the book Magnificent Obsession was published, Bible sales skyrocketed throughout the world? Why was that, Mr. Ogg? Because everyone began to search for the biblical passage that formed the theme of the book. And Douglas, the stroke genius, never specifically pointed it out in the book. Looking for that passage almost became the most popular pastime in this country for a year or more and made Magnificent Obsession a bestseller. And those who found the injunction would keep the specific gospel chapter and verse to themselves, as if it were a privileged secret that the one could only become part of it through his own discovery. We could use that sort of game today, Mr. Ogg. Yes, we could. Do you know the passage assignment? The lens man rose to his full height, faced me across the desk, cupped his right hand to that, and proceeded. I'm positive that was never delivered better, except on the mountain 2,000 years ago. I poured my friend a cup of terrible coffee, and then we made small talk as I strolled, cup in hand, slowly around my office. He paused all the walls studded with autographed photographs and read the names aloud, his voice rising gradually in pitch with each additional name as if to signify that he was impressed. The old fox was teaching me and loved it. Rudy Valley, Art Lincolnshire, John F. Kennedy, Charles Percy, Harlan Sanders, Joey Bishop, Senator Harlan Fuse, Frank Gifford, James Stewart, Robert Cummings, Robert Redford, Barbara Streisand, Ben Hogan, Norman Vincent Peale. These are your friends. Some or others thought they showed their gratitude for an article we did on them one time or another. I like James Stewart and all those movies, good movies. You know him? I knew him many years ago while I was a bombardier in the B-24 group in World War II. He was brave, very brave. He completed his combat tour long before there was such fighter escort to protect our bombers, and he could outdrink all of us. Good, good. Simon continues casual injury in the office. Finally, he put down his coffee cup. I cannot wait any longer. Tell me your good news, Mr. Ogg. You brought me good luck, Simon. I'm sure of it. There must be a lot of. Remember last night your play when you discovered all those amazing coincidences between my book hero and you? How can I ever forget? One thing I had learned in New York was that good self help and inspirational writing was at a premium. Whether it was the state of the nation or just another publishing cycle, every publishing house, it seemed, was on the lookout for another wake up and live, or the power of positive thinking, or how to win friends and influence people. Wherever our country gets down on itself, and it seems that self help books rise to the top of the sales charts, and most publishers trying to anticipate the future are apparently figuring the country was in another down. I thought Simon would be a natural. I took the plunge. How many rules are there? Only four, and after months of labor and a mountain of notes, the few pages were containing the essence of the simple secrets of success seemed hardly worthy of all the research I had done. Then I reminded myself that it took many tons of rock to produce an ounce of gold. Subsequently, I told my findings out in the world. I used them in my own manner, and they have never failed. You have this material in writing now. When I had completed my work in the longhand, I brought it to a small printing establishment on Broadway. They typed it in format they requested it. I used that master copy to reproduce 100 sets. Then I numbered each copy 1 to 100. You would be perfect, but make no hasty decision on this. Sleep on my offer for many nights. There's a time yet, and of course, if you accept the gone memorandum, I must ask a small payment for my work as would any self-respecting author. Payment? Okay. No, no, you do not understand. I'm not talking about money. If the God memorandum passes to you, it is necessary. First, that you promise me that you will use it personally, as I've instructed, every day reading the God memorandum for 100 days in a row before going to sleep, and you have the miracle. It's from you to you from God, a message from God to you. Yes, there's a look in the eyes that tells me you have not found success. The world praises you, yet you do not. There's a familiar to me. So when you receive the God memorandum, you must agree that you'll first employ it to the strengthen and guide you in your own quest for happiness by using it for every day for 100 days in a row, and then helping others people's read it too to create their miracle. Then and only then are you to pass it on to others who are ready, to those who have eyes to see and ears to hear and desire to help themselves. All right, Simon, I agree to that. I'll do that. Mr. Ogg, you have great potential. You're a rare talent. You must not be wasted. I shall see that you are not. Simon, your words make me feel very humble, very small. You are far from small, dear friend. Look, look, where I placed your book. I turned my head and followed the direction of his open hand toward the tallest pile of Hand of God books in his living room. There on the top of the pile was mine. And that is the reading from the Greatest Miracle in the World. Again, I highly recommend reading this book, Greatest Miracle in the World, and the other two books in the great trilogy of Augmentinos, The Greatest Salesman in the World, The Greatest Secret in the World, and The Greatest Miracle in the World. And you are the greatest miracle in the world. God bless you. God Christ Guru.